to get us started. This is a dresser that used to be in my grandmother's bedroom in a cabin that we had in the North Woods, and I spent a lot of time there growing up. And I really did feel like it was a secret drawer and that it held all kinds of things that were important to me and my existence and my relationship with her. And I went back to that drawer every summer, mostly knowing what would be in there, right? Except every time I opened it, it felt, like there was a mystery, that there was a secret, that there was something rich that would be in there when I opened that drawer. And for me, going back to that drawer provided a sense of safety and comfort and connection. And often she would come to sit with us in that bedroom. Oop, I see Sue's screen. Switch back to me. There we go. That's okay. And what happened every summer was that we would sit in that room and we would talk and we would do manicures and we would hang out, and all the things that were in the drawer would sometimes change just a little bit, but mostly they would remain the same, because what we really wanted was that same connection, and it was all centered around the things that we knew would be there. And I offer this to you as a metaphor this morning for some of the things that I have listed over on the side. And these are 7 principles of good practice in undergraduate education. And they've been around probably as long as that dresser has been around. And they are faculty to student interaction, student to student interaction, promoting active learning, communicating high expectations, facilitating time on tasks, providing rich, rapid feedback, respect, and diverse learning. So when we go to thinking about course design, some of the things that have remained forever still remain today. They're good practices. We expect connection. We expect things to change in small ways. We want to promote the things that we know make us feel safe and comfortable. And we want to teach from a place that we understand. And sometimes I think when we start to talk about these things like, oh my goodness, what does online learning mean? What does using the technology mean? We start to fall into this kind of pit of there's all kinds of things that I don't know how to do or use or, relate to. And yet here we are with these 7 principles for good practice in undergraduate education. And they haven't changed all that much. I'm going to go ahead and have you change the slide, Amy, for me. So how many of you have heard the concept in the last few weeks of backward design? Everybody raise a hand. Yeah. It's there, right? It exists. It's a framework that we like to hang things around because it actually holds true to being a good educational practice. It works well for course design. Transparent teaching, I think at this point, is something that we can really rely on when it comes to thinking about online teaching and our hybrid courses. And we'll talk more about hybrid in a little bit. The metaphor that Flower Darby uses in her text, small teaching online, is really that of going on a journey, being in a car together, and she uses some of these questions. Where do we want to go? How will we know if we have arrived? And what will we need to do to help us get there? So, really these are the foundations of a course. They're the questions that can really guide your course. What I would say about transparent teaching, and which is why I kind of put that overlay over the top of this, is that this is something that you can talk to your students about, right? And being in an online course or in a hybrid situation means that we need to be more direct in our conversations with students, in including them, and in telling them more about why we're doing what we're doing. So when I see these questions, these are kind of some of the topics that I would see a lot, connecting and relating to to the questions. So where do we want to go? Really, that's your learning outcomes. With backward design, we always start, as you can imagine, at the end. What do we really want students to get out of our course? Okay. Where do we really want them to land by the time that they finish? How will we know if they have arrived there? So we get to that place by assessment, formative and summative, small assessments along the way, lots of practice, and then reflection and discussion. What will we need to help us get there? Now this gets more involved, and I would love to spend more time with each one of you, right? So I'm kind of a point of need instructor, and big conversations like this where I can't converse with each one of you about your course are not as beneficial to me as when we take the time to meet and talk to each other. So at any point, please know that you can call on the CTL to have conversations about any point that we're talking about today. But what we need to help us get there really is to create this community, this place of trust. And trauma-informed teaching is really rising in the literature right now because students are looking for some of the things that I talked about my grandmother's dresser drawer, and that's that sense of safety and connection and emotional regulation. And a lot of our students are young enough still that they don't know how to provide those kinds of things for themselves. They don't necessarily know about self-care, especially in these kinds of environments. And so when you see those things kind of creep into your online spaces, you're going to have to do a lot of talking to students about these things, and you're also going to have to rely on us to help you do it, and we're happy to. We've included a lot of resources about trauma-informed teaching. It could be a session all on its own, as could anti-racist pedagogy, and those are things that I'd like to cover more and spend more time on. Universal design, all of those kinds of things over the course of the summer. Hopefully we'll be able to hit some of those points along the way. So trust and community are key, really, to building an online space or a hybrid course. And then, of course, we've got our map, which is our syllabus. For those of you who have attended other workshops, go ahead and shout out to me some of the things that you've heard about syllabus design in an online environment. What do we put there? What needs to be there that may not necessarily have crept into your syllabi before? Michelle Herder says structure and clear schedule. Absolutely. Absolutely. Probably more than ever before, students want to know when they're going to be meeting, what the map is for the course, and all the steps along the way. So it's where you might have planned a week on Moodle before, planning day to day, time of meetings, links to materials in the schedule. Absolutely. What Devin say? More explicit information about how you'll communicate with each other. Yep. So if you expect your students to engage with you in the morning and read an email about what they're going to do for that day, that needs to be very clear to them, that they have kind of something that they can count on, right? A guide that they know is going to be there, and that for the most part, that's not going to shift throughout the course of the block. I think change is one of the hardest things that they're going to have to deal with throughout an online course. And so having some guideposts and some things that they can count on along the way are most certainly helpful. One of the things we noticed with students in block 6 and 7 is that they said that they had a difficult time motivating themselves to do the coursework online. Now, they were definitely in it with us, right? They were in that kind of emergency situation space where they hadn't had time to work with online courses before, although some of them it's most certainly taken them in other places. What I would say about motivation is that there are definitely ways that you can create it. There are a billion articles out there right now talking about this, but some of the things that I think that we can do with our students in terms of motivation is getting them to start thinking about working with each other. And that might be outside of anything that you have to do. So it might be having them choose a buddy in class, somebody who's going to, be their personal trainer for the block. and maybe there'll be the same in return for them. So partnering up, making small study groups, using kind of the back channel chats that we're going to talk about later. Amy's going to talk a little bit about that. Other places where they can have conversations about what they're going through, about the course, about motivating each other, about staying on track, and really kind of focusing on being successful in your course. So motivation for me is something that is coming to the top for our students, and they really need help with it. They're not fantastic at doing it, and so it's something that we can provide some guidance. And then, of course, the vehicle is your course design. But since we've really wrapped around in backwards design to thinking about all of the pieces of that, we're already at a place of course design. We have a lot of things just on this slide that would help you put a course together. Okay, I'll switch slides. One of the things that Flower Darby brings up, and this really is attributed to another scholar, and I'll have to put that in the slide, is this notion of enduring understanding, and what really is important to you that students leave your course with, that not only kind of satisfies a learning outcome or goal, but that they can take with you from this journey to another journey. How can they build on this journey and go further? How can they create an entirely new journey from what they learned in your course? So what are kind of your non-negotiable learning outcomes, things that are going to extend beyond your classroom, that are going to take them out into the world and be better people, better humans, better students, better lifelong learners? And how do we get there? So back to the car metaphor, the car won't run well if it's out of alignment. So we have to talk to our students about that alignment. They need to be able to follow your design, your goals, your outcomes, your activities, your assessments. They need to know how those are connected, why they're there. If they're in survival brain, and my light is going to flick off because I have the weird motion sensors in here, so now I'm in the dark. And I don't sit under a sensor either, so that's helpful. To get them to learning brain is going to take some time. So moving from that survival, I just have to get it done. I'm not in the space where I want to be. You know, all those kinds of things are part of their story right now. And we have to help them move to that place where they feel more comfortable and can actually process information, analyze information, and start to learn again. One suggestion, again, that we get from kind of the backward design model, and especially from Small Teaching Online, is to start building on your final assessment pieces first. Okay, and this is super popular with the block plan. It always has been, and many of you probably do this. So we often talk about point of need, and we may not get to our end assignment until maybe midway through the block. But with online teaching, with hybrid teaching, I would really encourage us to start talking about our final assessment pieces early and have students start to engage with how they're going to get to the end. How are they going to run the marathon? How are they going to, get to the end of the journey with us? Again, lots of ideas out there. You might start a course with student videos centered around their own inquiry and curiosity, right? And you could use tools such as Flipgrid. We're going to have a new tool called VoiceThread, where they can start to send video back to you. They can start to comment on each other's videos. Another thing is you could use Moodle on the first day of class and ask them how they're going to start being ready to prepare for the exam on the last day of class. What do they already know how to do? What do they want to get better at? Start having them set some learning goals for themselves. That's going to help with that motivation piece. And if they know that they have points of kind of places of struggle, absolutely suggest the CTL resources and start to get them to think about how they're going to support their own learning. So it's not just that we're trying to motivate them and get them going. we're going to talk more about VoiceThread, and we're actually going to have a demo eventually, Santi, but it is, it's kind of an asynchronous tool where you can post video, students can post video, you could have active learning assignments in this platform, and students can basically thread comments about anything that you've posted in that space. And Amy will talk a little bit more about that later for you. That's a good question. Okay, let's flip. This was a template, yeah, you bet. A template that the folks who presented yesterday put up for backward design, and I'll send out share a link with that if you're interested in using it. But this is a really simple way to kind of start to scaffold assignments and put them together. So what do we want students to be able to demonstrate by the end of the course? Throwing our learning outcomes in there. What, you know, and those could be based on Bloom's taxonomy. We really want those active verbs. What will we be able to see, hear, smell, taste by the end of that course? What should they be able to do? What are those really kind of tangible outcomes? And then finally, what tools and processes will help us collect the information? Are we going to use rubrics? Are we going to use exams? We're going to have a session on testing later in the month of July, and we'll talk about assessment and testing at that point. And then finally, how are we going to offer opportunities for students to practice? How do we scaffold our assignments? How do they connect to each other? What's that content, that instruction going to look like? So again, who's there? Thank you. Go back one. As we were saying, Small Teaching Online is the book by Flower Darby, but Small Teaching Online means a lot of things to me. And we're going to be faced with a couple different scenarios. Some of us are going to be doing work completely online with students. Others of us are going to be in a hybrid situation where we have students online at the same time as we have students in our socially distanced classroom while we're teaching synchronously, okay? That's the definition that Cornell is going to use for hybrid. So when the word hybrid comes up and we all have a breakdown and meltdown about what hybrid means, hybrid for Cornell is going to mean that environment where we have students with us and we have students who are connecting into our class through Zoom, most likely. Okay. And that might mean that they're in the dorm. It might mean they're in quarantine. It might mean they chose to stay home. And it could be the reverse. It might mean that you have to be home and that you have students in the classroom who are running the tech that day. We could have a lot of different scenarios, but that really is where we're living with the language of hybrid at this moment. So one way to really deal with online and hybrid situations and teaching is to start thinking of those kind of enduring principles in small ways of teaching. Now, those of you who have taught, how many of you have taught elementary school, high school? Anybody taught outside of the college realm? Yeah, you'll have, Santi asked if we'll have cameras to record the in-class session. Yes, we're going to have a couple different classroom scenarios where we'll have different cameras and different layouts, and in our video sessions later in July, we'll talk about those. Kristen says, yeah, I'd love one. I bet we could find a camera for you. So again, back to small teaching and thinking about things that have been in existence forever. So teaching high school, I always had to create units or small modules for students with lesson plans in place. And those were longer. On the block plan, I would imagine a module or a unit might be smaller, right? It might be a 2-day experience. It might be a 3-day experience with 1 or 2 learning outcomes aligned with course goals, your enduring questions, or your problem-based learning. And those, the content, the activities, and the assessments, the formative and the summative, are really going to connect to the why of your course. So let's say I want students to be able to turn into me and really understand how to use and evaluate sources so that they're annotated bibliography is something that they could use going further for a final project at the end of the course, right? My module might be a 2-day module on evaluating sources. And I would set the learning outcomes for those 2 days. And then I would align all of my content, my activities, and my assessments with that. And I would explain to the students that 2 or 3 day chunk of my block. Now, it's not that I don't think that we all do these kinds of things. I think it's that we're not as overt in our discussion with students about them. And that's something that I think that we can do more of, and that will be really helpful to them, especially as they navigate these different ways of being in the classroom. Flipped classroom is something that you've heard probably enough about, but really a lot of that is viewing lecture, lab, pre-recorded work, having out of class active learning assignments, still can be group even though it's online, followed up with some kind of discussion. Now that discussion might be face-to-face discussion. It might be with some students in class, but working in a tech platform on their laptops with other students online. So you may find that you're socially distanced in your classroom, right? And you probably will. So it's going to be really hard for you to say, hey, pair up or work in a group. But if everybody has a laptop and everybody can get to a platform such as VoiceThread or Moodle, you can still do some of that group work in your class, and then have a bigger discussion, a live discussion in your face-to-face classroom with those students who are also online about the work that they just did. Thanks, Amy. The other thing I could see too working well in kind of the mix of online and hybrid is a seminar style workshop. And I think this would work best with probably upper level students, and they would definitely have a lot more asynchronous material and opportunities to do some of the research and the study and the field work or whatever we can do when fall comes around outside of class. And then you might spend your face-to-face time with them or your online time with them in small groups, and they might stay with their small group for the entire block. But I would do that probably only if I knew the students well, and I could facilitate a group that I thought would work well together, and that they would be able to meet and accomplish those enduring goals and objectives that we had set out for the block, hopefully together. So those are just a few ways that I see the online teaching and the hybrid teaching working. Go ahead and flip. So this is my lake. It's my very favorite place. This is how I want you to envision fall. Everybody with me? Calm, beautiful, smooth. I want you to think a little bit about active learning, that it can happen in all environments. I want us to be positive about that. And that's my gig. That is what I'm here to help you do, is to make sure that active learning continues to happen no matter how we set up socially distanced classrooms, no matter if we're online, no matter if you're in a hybrid classroom. I want you to talk to me about making active learning happen. It may take more guidance. It's still going to include group and pair work, and that can still happen. We're going to still encourage that risk-taking and reflection with our students. And we still want to kind of include the big picture impact for them. So what does it mean to have engaged in this kind of classroom? What does it mean to go forward? And then finally, I want you to think of how this all becomes part of their story of being at Cornell during this time. Okay, so we're all part of a really big, interesting, terrifying, beautiful, crazy, wild story right now. And I think we'll definitely want to capture that. We want to talk with our students about that story. We want to include story in our classes. And we will actually have a portfolio for our students as soon as I build it, which I'm really grateful for. And they'll be able to start including some of those stories and some of the work that we've talked about here in that space. So questions for me at this point?
I have a question, Jen, that I sent to
Yeah.
you. We don't have to answer really toward the end. It's more of a general question, and
Uh-huh.
I think Joe's here too, so maybe he can answer this as well. So one thing I've been grappling with is what I think is somebody new to is what contact hours mean. So before I was meeting like maybe 3 hours a day to sometimes 3.5 or 4
Mhm.
with students in the classroom. But obviously, if we're needing to social distance, and let's say I have a class of 23 in our kind of a smaller art history classroom. So let's say I have to meet 2 different times with those students in order to social distance them. But then I have some students online. Obviously, there's no way that that's sort of humanly possible where I can meet with each of those groups live for 3 hours.
Mhm.
So I, like, in my mind, hybridity means like a different type of contact where some of the contact is happening asynchronistically, which is kind of what I did for block 8. So I'm just
Mhm.
kind of wondering what the expectations are, or like what the thoughts are on that, because it's a different type of learning and it's a different type of teaching, certainly.
Absolutely. And I think that, when we have those situations where we can have students in our class and online at the same time, you can definitely think of that as synchronous contact hour time, right? And so we can definitely engage in some ways where that seat time is the same. Now, when they're working on projects that are outside of class, in those asynchronous environments, before we get to pull them in and talk to them in maybe smaller groups, things like that, I feel like, and Joe can maybe counter me on this or back me up, when I have seen what the HLC has put out about online and hybrid classes, all of that work really does count towards seat time, just like it would in a normal class, right? If you had a seminar that was outside, that was in a kind of brick and mortar space, and you were meeting students in rotating groups, you would still count that work that they were doing as seat time. So for me, I don't see a huge difference in the number of hours spent. It's just a little bit more difficult to quantify.
Mm-hmm.
So asynchronous work to me counts as part of your core seat time.
Yeah, because one thing I was worried about, I think it's a lovely idea to kind of record live sessions and to have live sessions, in virtual land as well as sort of live in person. But what happens if we have students who are out like in California, who aren't going to be on campus or on the East Coast, and we run into those problems again where
With the
we
time
really,
zone issues,
yeah,
things like that, yeah.
yeah.
And you might have to decide what time as a
Mm-hmm.
group you could have synchronous class session too. Um, what's Aaron saying? Aaron is saying it's true. We are actually talking more about this in the implementation team right now, so it's
Okay.
not completely defined at this moment.
Sure. Okay.
But
Well, and I have been on calls with HLC representatives that we organized it among the ACM deans. I think they view hybrid teaching more like in-class teaching, and then they have their best practices for strictly online teaching. And one thing they were adamant about is you couldn't meet half your class one day, the other half the other day, and not do anything. So the students are only getting about half as much instruction. That wouldn't work. But I think, as Jen said, anything we're doing to provide learning opportunities for them can be counted. If they're working in groups and you're checking in with the groups every so often, or if you're meeting as a class and have part of the class zoomed in, that's all part of it. I mean, nobody's going to be around with a stopwatch making sure you're getting your time in. But at the same time, we can't just say, oh, this is too hard, and so you're only going to learn half as much and spend half as much time here. So that's where we have to figure out the strategies for getting what we need accomplished in the class and the learning objectives. And the more we can do that synchronously, that's what students are paying for at Cornell is actually live interaction with faculty members. How am I doing, Jen? All right?
I think so. And Katie mentioned too that if they're engaged in studying it, your recorded lectures, anything that's in an asynchronous format counts, absolutely. But it is, we definitely want that present piece as much as possible. Now, whether that is getting everybody together in a synchronous space, that would be ideal. And in some respects, like you said, we're still going to have the issues of time zones and students who may not be able to make those classes and make that work. And those students, hopefully, we're going to have a chance to be able to let them know a little bit more in advance this time what the course setup looks like, and that they need to be available during certain times and for synchronous work. And then they may be able to make some choices based on the type of course that would actually fit their life at this point. So if they really are, working crazy hours, they have a family situation that's not working for them, those kinds of things, it might be best for them for a little bit to really kind of gear them toward more online courses with asynchronous content. So hopefully we'll be able to put some of that out into the universe for them so they can make those choices.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks so much, Jen and Joe and everyone.
The other thing I'd say is, assuming we're open with students on campus, we still need to sort of follow our normal course hours, because students are going to be involved in other things outside, after 3 p.m. in the afternoon and so forth. That if we're here running, and now, athletics may be different than it is now, or how I do band may be different than putting 50 people in a room, but they're still going to be engaged in these other co-curricular kinds of learning activities if the campus is open. So we're going to have to think about, how do we get our instruction done during that sort of normal hours? And I would think for students in our country, if they're not here, if they have to get up an hour earlier or stay an hour later online than they're used to, that's one thing. The trickier part is, of course, with international students. And that's going to be a little more creative management of the time zones there.
And Genevieve asked a little bit. Genevieve, do you want to ask your question?
Sorry, I have to unmute myself. So are we going to be allowed, we're talking about course hours, let's say we're in the classroom doing these hybrid courses, are we going to be allowed the 2 hours and 45 minutes to be in that single classroom with those students socially distanced, or is that time going to be limited because of virus regulations, CDC regulations about how many people are meeting for how long, that type of stuff?
I think that's something that the implementation group is still looking at too, as we get more and more information. But honestly, no, probably you don't want to spend 2 hours and 45 minutes in a classroom with students with the viral load and the aerosol load that's going to be in there. So again, starting to think about those small teaching opportunities and how to best leverage your time in the classroom. So what are they doing asynchronously with guidance in groups outside of the classroom, so that when they come into the classroom, they have that time to really, dig in, ask questions, talk with you, those kinds of things, so that time is spent most wisely.
So in all likelihood, because our hours will be limited in the classroom, we're going to have some sort of I don't know whether it's Zoom or something, some sort of asynchronous format, and then classroom time.
I would think you would have a mix of both. Yep.
Okay. It's going to have to be that way.
Yep.
Okay.
And I don't know if I can answer Alice's question right now. When or how will we know which students will be on campus and which ones will be off campus? I think we're trying to gather that information.
We're surveying students, but what they tell us now may change. May change. I think it's going to be, who walks in the door.
I think there are two pieces. One is that students may just not come back to campus. Those would be people who aren't enrolled. Then students who want to live remotely and learn remotely have to apply for that. And the guidelines are very similar to the same guidelines we're expecting of faculty and staff who are applying to teach or work remotely, as well as adding some travel restrictions. So for example, international students who are unable to travel to the US, which obviously is generally not an issue, although in some people's case might be this year, they also could be eligible to apply. So there's going to be an application process.
And we're working on a plan, Katie, for which classes will be returning to campus. It hasn't been decided yet at this time.